Thanks, Tierney, for the introduction. Really excited to be back at the GEM workshop and talking about one of my favorite topics, incorporating equity in the energy transition. I'll just take a minute to share my slides. You're able to see them, Tierney?
Yeah, you look great.
Okay, all good. Yeah, so I'm just going to be talking just 3 tips for incorporating equity into electrification projects and policies, since I just have 5 minutes here. But yeah, I think it was really great to follow on from Laura, because I know Samad is doing a lot of work in this area. So just Tierney was able to share a bit about my introduction, but in terms of the experiences that have shaped these tips that I'll be talking about, while I was a graduate student at UC Davis, I had the opportunity to think about incorporating equity for the first time into the project-based zero net energy course that Kurt was mentioning earlier. And while I was a graduate student, I also, in my thesis, was able to explore electrification barriers to affordable housing. And now that I'm working at Berkeley Lab, I work on a couple of projects that are related to equity, both on the commercial side of things and the residential side of things. And also, because of my interest in this area, I serve as the IDEA liaison, or Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accountability liaison for my department. So these are some of the things that have shaped these tips that I'll be talking about today. But first, before we jump in, just so everyone gets what I mean by equity, I like to refer to this definition from the Initiative for Energy Justice, because I think it contextualizes this topic well in terms of the energy transition. So thinking about equity in terms of both the participation in energy systems and also remediating burdens on those who have been historically harmed by energy systems in the past. So thinking about who's involved and also those burdens that have been historically passed on to certain communities. So yeah, now I'll get into the 3 tips, and I like to think of these in terms of questions that you can ask while you're working on these electrification projects. So the first question is, who is your system benefiting? And some things you can consider beyond your typical maybe building occupant or the building owner. You can also think of benefits in terms of the larger student population on your campus. So like Kurt and Josh were talking about earlier, like having a class where students can participate in electrification projects in collaboration with your facilities office on campus. Are there ways that you can facilitate their learning through tours? And then also you can think about how you can benefit the surrounding community. This one might be a bit more difficult to think about, but one way that you can do this is when you're thinking about installing your solar panels or your battery storage system, is there a way that you can use that power to also support resilience for the surrounding community in the case of a power outage or a natural disaster? So this is actually something that we're exploring in one of my projects at Berkeley Lab, but with federal sites instead of with university campuses. And another way that you can think of supporting the surrounding community is through technical assistance. So all this experience that you're gaining with electrification projects, can you share that through partnerships? If we jump to the Pathways for Change part over here, can you share that through partnerships with community organizations or through working with local government working groups? So these are some ways that you can implement those considerations. The second question is, who are you working with? So some things you can think about are, who are you hiring or recruiting? Are they from minority serving institutions, or are you reaching out to professional associations and affinity groups, such as the National Society for Black Engineers? Are you putting your job postings out for these institutions and these groups to see? You can also think of who are your contractors. So this comes up in some of the procurement related work that I do. Are you contracting with small businesses or minority owned businesses, such as women owned or veteran owned businesses? And some ways that you can implement these considerations is through looking at your hiring or recruitment policies and also your procurement policies and guidelines. Finally, I just wanted to point out this question of how are you ensuring accountability? So in terms of those 2 questions that I was talking about earlier, how are you measuring your progress towards equity? Like, what are some ways you can think of doing that? And you can think of it in terms of metrics. So for example, that first question I asked where you're thinking about who is your system benefiting, You can consider the number of students who are working on energy projects and also the number of residents who are supported and engaged through your programs and initiatives. In terms of who are you working with, you can think about tracking demographics of your current workforce and new hires, and also the proportion of your contracts that go to smaller minority-owned businesses if you're focusing on the procurement piece. So yeah, just really quickly, these are some tips that you can use in terms of incorporating equity into your electrification projects. I know I gave several examples, but really these are the three main questions that you can use as a framework to apply to your own projects going forward. So that's one thing I hope you take away from the presentation today. And I don't know if we have time for questions, but you can feel free to reach out to me if you have any. Thanks.